The legal action alleges the government has and continues to, on both an individual and systemic level, willfully deny and conceal the risks posed by mefloquine.
They're going to argue this is PTSD. But there are telltale signs of mefloquine toxicity PTSD does not have.
The drug may be marketed under the brand name Lariam, but Dr. Remington Nevin, a world expert on mefloquine toxicity with Johns Hopkins University in the U.S., has another name for it.
I call it a horror movie in a pill for good reason, because the effects of this drug you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy.
So far, some 3,000 veterans have expressed an interest in joining the mass tort. 900 have already signed their names to it, accusing the very government they were prepared to die in combat for of poisoning them.
So there is government money. There's just no federal government money. Every province administers their own health care. If, like we did in Alberta, we get provinces to recognize it, get that recognized in the legislation, have it a bill passed that says, yep, this is a real thing. Now, next year, when the government has grants, etc., we can apply, create a foundation, apply for grants, use those grants then to make the study.
Right. And I think you have the right idea going to the provinces for the recognition first. Once the provinces recognize and start funding this, then it becomes a question of, well, where are you on this one, federal government? Because Veterans Affairs is a federal mandate. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's one of those things where, you know, it's not just a battle, it's a war.
That's a wounded veteran! Yes! That's a wounded veteran! Yes! That's a wounded warrior right there! They got his tears fucking head!
The legal action alleges the government has and continues to, on both an individual and systemic level, willfully deny and conceal the risks posed by mefloquine.
They're going to argue this is PTSD. But there are telltale signs of mefloquine toxicity PTSD does not have.
The drug may be marketed under the brand name Lariam, but Dr. Remington Nevin, a world expert on mefloquine toxicity with Johns Hopkins University in the U.S., has another name for it.
I call it a horror movie in a pill for good reason, because the effects of this drug you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy.
So far, some 3,000 veterans have expressed an interest in joining the mass tort. 900 have already signed their names to it, accusing the very government they were prepared to die in combat for of poisoning them.
So there is government money. There's just no federal government money. Every province administers their own health care. If, like we did in Alberta, we get provinces to recognize it, get that recognized in the legislation, have it a bill passed that says, yep, this is a real thing. Now, next year, when the government has grants, etc., we can apply, create a foundation, apply for grants, use those grants then to make the study.
Right. And I think you have the right idea going to the provinces for the recognition first. Once the provinces recognize and start funding this, then it becomes a question of, well, where are you on this one, federal government? Because Veterans Affairs is a federal mandate. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's one of those things where, you know, it's not just a battle, it's a war.
Hey, good morning out there, troops. This is Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now on this 16th day of January 2023. It's been quite a weekend, I guess. Lots of stuff going on over the weekend. Just trying to hit the wave tops here today, cut through all that noise and get right to the signal, we hope. Let's dive right into it, I guess. Let's see what's going on out there. Okay. So, oh, shoot. Let me back this up. I was trying to look up the proper spelling for a word there for a second. Let me just get rid of this webpage. And we'll start her off with our philosophy meme here for the day. Okay, so here's Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he is the writer of the masterpiece of the 20th century, as far as the literary world is concerned. It's called The Gulag Archipelago. It's several volumes, actually. The full-length version of it is enormous. I take it in on audiobook. Yeah, it's quite a lot. But, you know, it's one of those works it's like every word is selected perfectly, and it's just so packed full of meaning. You know, every sentence is just cram-packed full of it. I would also put maybe Friedrich Hayek's Constitution of Liberty up there with this. But yeah, it's just incredible writing, and he's Russian, obviously, but somehow the translation into English still works. And it says, "Evil people always support each other. That is their chief strength." Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I just want to point out that he is observing the rise of the Soviets there in Russia, and that would have been a prophet generation, as in the previous prophet generation. And when they get to peak institutional power, that's when we enter the crisis era, according to Strauss-Howe generational theory, which is called a fourth turning. That crisis era is called a fourth turning. That's what we're in right now, as we have been since 2008, and we're not forecasted to come out of it until 2026 to 2030, at least in the United States. Evil people always support each other. That is their chief strength. And this, to me, is reminiscent of the Somalia affair, because that's what the report said after that happened, was that all of the officers and everybody involved, everybody that knew about the rape, torture, and killing of that 16-year-old Somalian boy, they all stuck together all the way up the chain of command, all the way right up to the Chief of Defense Staff's desk, through NDHQ in Ottawa, and even the MP, I guess it would have been NCIS or whatever you call it, the guys there, the MP guys in Ottawa. And yeah, that I think is a kind of cultural phenomenon that we can observe in that particular generational archetype, the prophet generational archetype, as in the Stalinists, and this time around it's the boomers, is that they all stick together and find the nearest little guy and throw him under the bus. And that's usually a Gen Xer, because we're younger than they are and we have to come up behind them. And so they get our head start, they outrank us, and that's what they did to Kyle Brown. They threw him under the bus, they scapegoated him. He wrote a book called Scapegoat. But they all stuck together and nobody was ever brought to justice. Okay, kind of a dark note to start things off on. But here is a little something. I don't even know where this comes from. This is just a meme that I saw that I think is pretty relevant right now. But a man cannot make himself, it says, without suffering. And there's a lot of good artwork going along with this if you're just listening. But it says, a man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor. And I've been pushing this idea a lot. Like I talk a lot about Strauss-Howe generational theory and how we're in a fourth turning, and a fourth turning is a crisis era that's really a leadership crisis. It's not a health crisis, as we've been told, but it's a leadership crisis across the board, and it has to do with this generational archetype that's born in the wake of the previous crisis, the prophet generational archetype. And when they reach peak institutional power, everything just kind of falls apart. And a pretty fair distillation, I think, of Strauss-Howe generational theory that I've seen around the pop culture, guys like Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec have mentioned it. They don't seem to want to explain what a fourth turning is or what Strauss-Howe generational theory actually posits. But what they do put out there is that old meme of strong men create good times make weak men bring hard times create strong men, and then the cycle continues. And the thing about the prophet generational archetype being born in the wake of the previous great crisis, in this case, the Second World War, is that they don't go to war, broadly speaking. And the only time I'm aware of where that really happened was with the draft into Vietnam. And, they dodged, and by and large, and it was just the boomer generation, not the silent generation, which was also subject to the draft initially. But not only that, but the guys who did go, they murdered their own officers by the hundreds. It's called fragging. That's it's named for the fragmentation grenades that they used. They would the boomers would throw those fragmentation grenades into the officer's bunk while he was sleeping. And they murdered over 800 of them, I believe, so they could ship opium back to the United States in their coffins. And so I can't see any other generations doing that. That's a Somalia affair, fragging, and the massacre My Lai that we can all attribute to them. And it all kind of goes back to that weakness of having been brought up in good times. That's kind of what we see, is that, if you don't subject yourself to that suffering, you go through those hard times like going to war. And this is historically a big part of the reason why we sent young men to war, was to show them hard times so they become strong men, because we need strong men to lead us. And we're not saying that's going to happen immediately after that suffering or anything, but it seems to be something that is almost like a necessary constituent of strong leadership, I guess. There's a kind of appreciation for suffering that I think is required in senior leadership, in senior leaders, so that they may understand why a light touch is required when wielding peak institutional power. But that's just kind of me talking there. That's my opinion, and I'm just ranting at this point. But anyway, this is, I thought, very interesting, how these things are tied together. Okay, so this is the Civilian Intelligence Network 3.0. And the title of the article here is Psychological Warfare, PSYOPs. We talk about that a lot here on around V4F. We talk about fifth generational warfare and how the psychological warfare is a component of that. And I've been saying how I think historians are probably going to look back at the current time and say that we're already in World War III, that it had already started at this point. It's not kinetic right now, but it is psychological, cultural, financial, and digital. It's in cyberspace as well. So this is a little something about the psychological component of it here. And again, this is Civilian Intelligence Network 3.0. And he says, PSYOPs, psychological operations, exploit human emotions to achieve desired outcomes, usually by a small group of people. Okay, like we've covered all that stuff. I'm going to say here's a small scale example, and here's I'm just going to skip down to the background because everybody here should be pretty familiar with the idea of what a PSYOP really is. But it says the Ottawa. This is why they're writing this article. The Ottawa Citizen wrote an article detailing how the military experimented on citizens of Nova Scotia. The exercise monitored residents' reactions and forged letters warning them of wolves that didn't exist. The article, published by November 2nd, 2020, is titled, quote, Canadian military wants to establish new organization to use propaganda, other techniques to influence Canadians, close quote. So this was something that was kind of making its way around the social medias there a while back. But this is a really interesting follow-up to it. So the United Nations released a document called Guide to COVID-19 Vaccine Communications, close quote, for health practitioners. It instructs them on how to use timing, stories, and emotions to change social norms and to make people desire a vaccine. It states, quote, and finally, what are some of the best ways to make taking the vaccine a norm within particular communities? In a perfect, limitless resource world, we'd have the opportunity to craft highly specific campaigns for each community and identity in the world, close quote. Why do you need to be manipulated into taking it with a specifically crafted message? Wouldn't you naturally desire it if you needed it? Criminals like to use something called social engineering. Simply by acting authoritatively, appealing to a victim's own greed, and pretending to have certain credentials, many a criminal has been able to manipulate good, honest people. They say nothing is new under the sun, and to some degree, that may be correct. In 1947, Edward Bernays wrote a short essay entitled Engineering Consent. In it, he describes how politicians and governments may learn what the public needs to hear in order to get a desired outcome. He explains how to research public interest and then tell them what they need to hear and need to see in order to manipulate them into action. Fast forward 70 plus years, exactly the same thing is happening now. Okay, so this part is really interesting here. The 7 PSYOP techniques. This is going to sound very familiar. Isolation. Isolation breaks you down in spirit. Solitary confinement is one of the harshest punishments an inmate can receive. Psychologists recommend a maximum isolation of 23 hours. When you were a child, afraid of monsters in your room, or parents reassured you things would be okay, what would have happened if they didn't? And the fear was allowed to grow. Okay, so psychological triggering. Remember your first love in high school? You probably had a first song. Years later, even though you may be in a new relationship, hearing that song again, instantly it brings you back to the emotions and feelings associated with that first love. It's a trigger. Masks are triggers. You could be outside enjoying the fresh air, but as soon as you put on that mask, you are instantly reminded of the daily fear you felt, and your state is instantly changed. Scarcity. Scarcity, also known as FOMO, fear of missing out, drives people to action. The rarer an item, the more desired it is. Make it available for a limited time, offer and demand shoots through the roof. Why does the supply of vaccines increase and then the media declares a shortage? To create demand and desire in humans. Information control, lack of knowledge. Do you know why horses wear blinders? They cover the rear vision of the horse, forcing it to look forward and to keep on track. If you are only presented with one viewpoint, you are maneuvered into a specific direction. That's a pretty good analogy. And division. You've heard the expression divide and conquer. A house divided against itself cannot stand. If a man was alone, robbers may be able to overtake him. But if he was with 2 or 3 friends, he could fight back and defend himself and unlikely be attacked. Repetition. Repetition familiarizes you with the topic, creating a dominant thought process. When alternative viewpoints are expressed that challenge your repeated belief system, you experience something called cognitive dissonance. You cannot accept the contrary viewpoint. New language. Language defines the way you think. With a new language, operatives associate new meaning and feelings with that language to control your reality. Words are powerful. Words shape your reality. And that was really kind of the central theme, I think, of Orwellianism as well. Like Orwell was so good at demonstrating how language was used to control the mind. So back to the article. Why do you think the alleged strains are called variants of concern? such a strange phrase instead of mutations? I've been saying the same thing. They're mutations. Like, this is exactly how evolution works, and we've known this for a very long time. So, well, I mean, not to this level. Sorry, this is microbiology, but I mean, I learned this in school. It's called a mutation, because people have preconceived notions of what mutation is. For some, it may be gaining superpowers, i.e., like the X-Men. Others, a mutation is something that becomes inert and harmless. But, quote, a variant of concern, close quote, is a new language defined as a new type of death to be fearful of. What about new normal? A year ago, masking a child prevented them from breathing properly, and isolated them would be child abuse. Now it's considered new normal. New language introduced this year also includes stay safe, build back better, and, quote, COVID-19, the vulnerable, vaccine passport, COVID bubble, flatten the curve, social distancing, super spreader, contact tracing, trust the science, contactless delivery. Congratulations, you speak a second language. Anything against this narrative is labeled as misinformation, designed to discredit and dismiss alternative viewpoints. These phrases are used to redefine your reality, to make you fearful, compliant, and obedient upon hearing them. A larger scale example, the fear of death is very real. If you lack certain knowledge, such as the difference between the germ theory and terrain theory, you could easily believe you could catch something and become ill. Though a repeated message of fear, you'll become deathly afraid. In a state of confusion from lockdowns, you're susceptible to reprogramming. Trained for 20 years in school to trust authority figures, they'll implicitly trust their decision, regardless of how much financial compensation influenced their instructions. Conditioned that anything from official sources was, quote, misinformation, close quote, you would dismiss alternative viewpoints. Instructed to wear a mask for fear of your own safety, you would associate fear with that trigger. Isolated and alone, you couldn't discover inconsistencies in the narrative presented through television, television, they have in quotes here, as in three separate words, television, or other media. It's not really that, is it? I think tele is like to change the location of, to put it somewhere else. Like a telephone is, you take that sound and you transport it somewhere else. Okay, or other media, and live in the growing fear. There was, So one thing I was thinking here, when they're talking about like the conditioning in school and stuff like that, I think like we can see how the millennials are split, and I think the more time you spend in school, probably the more in the tank for Canadian communism you're probably going to be. And those of us who've kind of been out of school a little bit longer, and I don't know, man. Like I just, I stay on top of my news and stuff like that. And it seems like the longer I've been out of school, the more I realized how egregiously I was lied to, especially near the end in high school with the revisionist history around the West and whatnot. But some of these folks, like a lot of the millennials, are just kind of fresh out of school, and they haven't really been out seeing what's really happening, or traveled, or lived in other communities, or things like that. And so they're completely reliant on the institutions for their worldview, I guess, or not completely, but they're predominantly reliant on that. So I think that's where it's at. That's where the battle is right now, is to kind of win the hearts and minds of that particular generation, the millennial generation, and try to bring them over here to the right side of history. But we got to engage. We got to get into this ideological battle space and engage with them. So back to the article. Threatened with fines for going against the narrative or trying to make a livelihood, you'll have a real fear of poverty, especially if you lack knowledge, belief in fear, and did not know you could have those fines dismissed. Unable to find alternative viewpoints due to information control, new language would redefine your reality. A specific ritual action, such as washing your hands or wearing a mask, would remind you to be fearful and compliant. Like a pressure cooker about to burst, you'd need a release. Vaccines would be declared as your solution, and you'd ignore rising death counts as associated with your injections. You need a release. Fake scarcity through shortages further creates a fear of missing out. Unless you stop and think. Realize your emotions are being exploited. Ask why. Get exercise, get sunshine, drink water, eat well, and think. Then you'll start to discover the truth. So I wholeheartedly endorse that. That's what I talk about a lot on this podcast. That's how propaganda works. it manipulates your emotions. And so when you're feeling something, whenever you're feeling fear or rage or whatever it is, just notice it. Just like, oh, hey, you know what? That's a feeling. So be careful of that. Right now, whatever I do next, I need to be very mindful of what that is and make a conscious decision. So that's just what it is. And everything they're saying, they always associate with morality. And it's just gaslighting, right? They don't build any kind of an argument. It's just highly emotive, and you're a bad person if you don't believe them. Okay, here's antihate.ca. Speaking of PsyOps, 5 ways to stop the far right in 2023. It says, make it your New Year's resolution to go out and demonstrate for social justice against far right bullies. Tell me that's not projection and gaslighting right there. And this is from the 4th. I was just kind of coming across this now, but I just want to give everybody a heads up on what they're up to. And I'm not going to get into all this because I know this is just going to be, like Justin Trudeau on a chalkboard reading this to everybody right now. But it says these are their tactics. This is what they're going to do. They're going to create a solidarity group, get together with your friends, family. Okay, fine. But drag queer event defense. They say they're coming for drag events. Trans and 2 LGBTQ plus people are more. God, I think that's even newer than the last one Trudeau put out there. People more than any other community right now, and many drag queen and queer events are being protested by the far right. Go show your support for the 2S LGBTQ2 plus community by performing protective barriers for the patriots, or for the patrons and the performers. Many of these counter demonstrations are not adversarial, and in fact have a fun vibe to them with dance parties and music. Go with your solidarity group and meet others who are committed to the community defense. Okay, school boards. 2022 saw an alarming number of far-right groups and individuals attempt to stack school boards in an effort to oppose gender inclusivity and anti-racism in the classroom. I would say that's probably just parents getting involved because they're sick of their children being systematically sexually confused for the purpose of turning them into permanent medical patients as big pharma livestock. And gender inclusivity as anti-racism in the classroom. Most lost, but some won. In the months since, there have been incidents in school board meetings where the far-right networks show up to disrupt and cause a disturbance. If you get wind of your school board experiencing protests, make plans with your solidarity group to show support and be present. We've seen all kinds of stuff going on at the school boards with them pushing this gender ideology and just kind of cramming it down the throats of children, and even teaching children to distrust their parents as some kind of evil bigots. It's all very Stalinist, what's next? I mean, litter boxes in the classroom, and then there's the coming out closet and stuff like that. So it's all, this is why they're getting called out with the hashtag okay groomer and stuff like that. Okay, monitor the far right and create content. Everyone has a significant role to play. Maybe you're in a remote area or have mobility issues. If you can't come to demonstrations, you can still be eyes and ears for people on the ground by monitoring social media and exposing the far right's plans. Find researchers in your area or nationally to pass the information, or create social media accounts to share it yourself. Get out, read out or get involved page. And okay, so this is enough. But you guys get the idea. This is the kind of stuff that I think they're going to be very aggressive on in the coming year. So stay frosty and stay safe. Make sure you keep your cool out there, because you know that they're going to be extremely provocative when they show up. I mean, I did show some of the trans activists that were, I mean, they're natal males, and they're rather masculine, threatening natal females who identify as women with physical violence, saying that these fists don't discriminate and things like that. So I'm just saying there are a lot of really agent provocateurs in these types of crowds. So stay frosty. I mean, don't let them get to you, right? Just let it roll off and show them some class. I would say that's the best way to do it. And here they are on Facebook with oh, I'm still logged in, am I? Son of a bee. Here we go. So here they are on Facebook, and then there's the Canadian Anti-Hate Network again, and it says "Drag Defenders Needed," and they have all kinds of different events that are posted up here. Peterborough Public Library, 345 Aylmer, January 14th. So that's a couple of days ago now, but they're tracking all this stuff anyway. And I would expect them to be pretty aggressive when it comes to protecting the groomers. Okay, this was making its rounds there Friday, and it really kind of picked up over the weekend. This pretty much distills it down in a single meme. I like memes. I think they're very effective. We're going to win the war with memes. It's an ideological war, and this is probably one of the most effective weapons I've seen in that ideological battle space yet is the meme. So this is Reed Coverdale, and he's showing an electric stove on the left and a gas stove on the right, and the electric stove is called a hunting stove, and over here on the right we have an assault stove. So that's pretty much the size of it. It's become another ideological target, basically. Now, there are a couple of reasons I think this is happening. It fits well with the kind of deranged lunacy we see coming out of the left with respect to all things carbon. But they're kind of the useful idiots for Beijing over here in North America. The North American left are, the useful idiots for Beijing. And it fits well with the kind of art of war stuff that I've talked about on the program before, where all points of contact are essentially to be exploited in this war. So whatever weakens the West is true. And I've talked about, attacks on the power grid and stuff like that before. And we've seen, I think, over the last couple of years that we're just not able to respond to emergencies the way that we used to be able to. So people are having to build a little bit more redundancy into their life plans, not just gardening, but cooking as well, right? So this is something that we use to cook. Nobody's asking for this. Nobody is complaining about anything natural gas related to natural gas stoves. But somehow they're making some stuff up about asthma now, so they're going to ban gas stoves. Well, what happens when the power grid goes down? What if the Russians get another power plant hacked and take it hostage? What happens when the Chinese launch a nuke from the dark side of the moon, where they've been doing missions for years and years and years, and they take out the North American power grid, say in the middle of winter, and people have nothing to cook with? Well, it's just another one of those redundancies that they're kind of going after right now. And like I said, it just makes us weaker, right? To everything in every way. It just makes us weaker as a society. And what's this? Well, this is Canadian bird. I take that's what that means. And this is, they're saying Adam Scotty, Justin Trudeau's personal photographer, took this pic in Trudeau's Ottawa home. Is that a gas stove? Well, look at that. That sure looks like a gas stove to me. Now, I don't know if this is just a set that somebody has set up to pretend to be Trudeau's home or what, but one of the first comments on here is, somebody's pointing out, nope, no fan. Somebody's, isn't there supposed to be an exhaust fan right about here somewhere, on the wall to draw all those pollutants out of the kitchen, those toxic fumes? So, the irony knows bounds. The hypocrisy knows no bounds here. And here's the Real Andy Lee show. And she says, I just want to remind everybody how Klaus Schwab kicked off the annual World Economic Forum meeting in Davos last year and what his priority was. Have a good summit. #WEF 2023. And here's the tweet from the World Economic Forum. It's dated January 17th, 2022. And it says, special address by Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China. And they're even calling him president. That is a euphemism. I'm sure that Xi appreciates that, but he's actually the chairman of, the chairman of like the inner chamber of the council of the Chinese Communist Party or something like that. It's actually a much more ominous title if you state it properly. But we use president for him to kind of mask what he really is. Yeah, he's the keynote speaker. He has been a couple of times, I think, and I've been saying it. That this is my best guess. I think that the WEF is basically a proxy for China. If you read some of the articles on the WEF website, especially when it comes to what happened in Sri Lanka with the implosion of their state there, and I was tracking that was basically going to happen eventually because of the kind of predatory lending practices that the CCP have been into with the Belt and Road Initiative in over the previous decade or so. And this is what they do, is they kind of get them on the hook with these loans, these infrastructure projects that they can't pay back, and eventually it just spirals out until the state collapses with all of these austerity measures and so on and so forth. But anyway, the WEF is, I think, finally being exposed for what it really is. And it's just good to see that on Twitter, I think, especially, we're allowed to talk about this now. These things are trending, and this is Canadian journalists. So anyway, people are waking up to what they're really all about over there. And here we have resist the WEF trending. So that's a positive sign. I think a lot of people in Canada are kind of waking up. So here's Candace M. And she says, I'm Candace from Canada. The villains at the World Economic Forum have captured our countries around the world. Canada has fallen. And this looks like a pretty regular kind of Canadian lady. I don't want to say house mom, but she's wearing an apron. So I'll go ahead and say, and a wedding ring. So she looks like she's a family woman, and she's having a little Pilsners here. And I think this is a very positive sign that things are going to turn and people are awakening in Canada. Okay, and here's Representative Corey Mills from south of the 49, and he says, today I spoke on the House floor about unleashing American energy. Yes, I voted yes on HR 22 to make America energy dominant again, and I was glad to see some Democrats put America first. We need to bring down energy costs for families and not depend on adversarial nations. So yeah, that's the foundation here, I think, is when they start attacking our energy sector, that's nothing's going to weaken us more in the West than that. And it's just not good for the world to be dependent on adversarial oil, because it's so much dirtier and so much more exploitive of humans. They treat people like peasants in a lot of other countries, especially in Africa, with artisanal mining, and the Chinese own a lot of those mines and so on and so forth. So it's just much better for us to exploit our own natural resources here at home and make sure that we do it in the least impactful way possible. But anyway, here is Republican Corey Mills.
Mr. Speaker, I had prepared a speech today to talk about the support that I come to rise for H.R. 22 and the protection of our strategic petroleum reserves. But after hearing my colleagues on the left, it's very simple. They don't care about unleashing American energy, us getting to energy dominance, to ensuring that we have the global currency. They care about defending the Chinese and the CCP. That's why they've continued to try and prevent us from being able to sell our strategic petroleum reserves for China. That's why they tried to stop us from putting together a subcommittee that would have been a select subcommittee to go after the CCP and their malign activities. Mr. Speaker, it is very clear. They do not want to go to an America First agenda. They do not want to protect America. They do not want to unleash American energy for the American people to get our costs under control. They want to continue to protect the Communist China Party and the Chinese themselves. I rise in protection not just in support of H.R. 22, but of the American people and the American workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I yield back.
Gentlemen.
Mr. Speaker, I had prepared a speech today to talk about.
There you go. Whatever weakens the West is true. All right. This is Gabe, and he says, message to Zelensky from the Donbass. Please tell the whole world how they're abusing us. Show them our houses. He said he'll negotiate for peace. Who is he serving? So, and this is the hashtag Zelensky war criminal. So a lot of interesting trends out there to start us off this year. Everybody, like with Twitter opening up and stuff like that, it's I think that it's really starting to turn here. So here we go.
Во всем виноват Зеленский. Не к Зеленскому. Если можете, приедьте в Мариуполь со всей Верховной Радой и посмотрите, что вы сделали.
Когда он Зеленский этот уже сложит свой портфель.
Sorry, for anybody just listening, it says, when will this Zelensky resign and just go to hell? He's an idiot.
И куда-нибудь удерет к чертовой матери. Придурок.
Передайте
Please tell the whole world how they're abusing us. Show them our houses.
всему миру, что издевается. Покажите наши дома. Это не правительство.
You can't even call this a government. He, Zelensky, is named his party servant of the people.
Он слуга народа. Чем ты служишь?
Whom are you serving? How are you serving the people? How?
Чем ты служишь народу? Чем?
Just by
Сволочь,
talking, that's
ля-ля-ля.
how?
Да не нужен нам
Bastards.
такой президент.
We don't want this kind of president or parliamentarians.
Зеленскому. А что?
As for Zelensky, I wish he'd come here, sit here.
Я ему пожелаю побыть здесь, посидеть тут, и чтобы его дети
I wish that the children would eat dirt with their food.
ели землю вместе с едой. И вот так вот, как
Just like us.
мы тут сидим. Мы выбрали клоуна.
So we chose a clown. And you know what? He and Trudeau, I think, are analogous figures. They're two peas in a pod, two Gen Xer demagogues. They're actors. And just like it says in the fourth turning, beware the Gen Xer demagogue.
Вот теперь веселимся.
Я считаю, что во всем виноват
I think Zelensky's to blame for everything.
Он обещал.
He promised, I will even negotiate with the devil to ensure peace.
Я с чертом буду договариваться, чтобы был мир. И договорился с чертом,
Instead, he agreed with the devil to destroy us.
чтобы нас уничтожили.
Не к Зеленскому.
This is starting over again here. It says this is an appeal to Zelensky. I wonder who she means when she says the devil. Is that Vladimir Putin or Joe Biden? Who do you make the deal with the devil to destroy us? Okay, this came out Friday. I think I reported this on Friday, but here's Chrystia Freeland, and she was really trying to pull a fast one on us there and get something in the budget for $2 billion for a corporation that doesn't even exist. And kind of, no, well, just give me the money and I'll stand up the corporation later, kind of idea. And she got called out on it by, I think it was a senator from Newfoundland, and I was just kind of going by the East Coast accent, but yeah, good job on the Senate. It's nice to see them active for a change. So here's Brian Lilly, who I think is controlled opposition. He's a Toronto boy. He was an Ottawa boy before, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure, he's dominated by some woman who's hard leftist or something, because he really kind of sold out over the last few years. But anyway, it's good to keep an eye on what's out there in the mainstream. So Freeland demands $2 billion to buy shares in a company that doesn't exist. A viral video from Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland explaining why she needs to spend $2 billion quickly is giving Canadians an inside look at how the Trudeau government acts first and thinks later. The video clip from the Senate Finance Committee hearing last December, when Freeland was asked to explain why she needed $2 billion to buy shares in a company that didn't exist. Freeland was questioned by Senator Elizabeth Marshall, a former top finance bureaucrat in the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and a former Auditor General of that province, about a part of Bill C-32 that calls for the establishment of the Canadian Growth Fund, but provides no details. Quote, it's going to provide $2 billion to you as minister to buy shares in a corporation which does not exist. There's no legislation which tells us anything about this yet to be created corporation. We don't know anything about the composition of the board or even whether there will be a board, close quote, Marshall noted. And here's a video clip.
I want to talk about Part 4, Division 1 on the Canada Growth Fund. And I have some concerns about that section of the bill. It's going to provide $2 billion to you as minister to buy shares in a corporation which does not exist. There's no legislation which tells us anything about this yet to be created corporation. We don't know anything about the composition of the board or even whether there will be a board. There's nothing to tell us about the financial controls that will be exercised over the $2 billion. And there's nothing to indicate what the governance structure is going to be. And equally concerning, there's a section there in that part of the bill that says that the $2 billion isn't the most that's going to be paid out. It leaves it quite open that there could be future monies coming out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and there's no limit on it. So what I don't understand is why, if you're going to establish a fund with money of that magnitude, why isn't there a separate bill which would outline the specifics of the company and also what the company is going to do, what the mandate is, what the objectives are, what the board composition is going to be? So it's really concerning to see $2 billion going out with an explanation. I think there were 17 lines there, and it leaves it quite open that additional monies can be paid out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So why is there not a separate piece of legislation?
Well, thank you for the question.
I'll spare you guys. I know we covered this on Friday, but I'll spare you guys the agony of having to listen to the Wicked Witch of the WEF there, and Canada's mom. It's all flattery and stuff like that, so it's just gross. So back to Brian Lilly. She went on to say that the bill didn't provide any information on how this money would be spent, controlled, or governed, and wanted to know why that information wasn't included and why this fund didn't have its own legislation. Freeland spoke for nearly 2 minutes about answering Marshall's question on how the corporation the government was buying shares in would be structured before saying they need to act quickly due to climate change and the Americans. And my comment at the time was basically what Chrystia Freeland said was, we weren't doing our jobs. We fell asleep at the wheel. The Americans didn't. And now that they're out ahead of us, it's going to be even worse for Canada because we didn't keep pace with them. Because I didn't do my job, me, Chrystia Freeland, the Wicked Witch of the WEF, and so now Canadians got to sign this $2 billion check over for what? We're not allowed to know. Yeah, real professional there, Chrystia Freeland. Quote, I would say to you two things. One, the green transition, we have to act quickly. But from my perspective, the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act added the urgency with which Canadians need to act, close quote, Freeland said. Quote, they're deploying hundreds of billions of dollars to invest in the green transition. We need to move really, really fast. And so getting this fund in place quickly is more important than ever. I'm not feeling the urgency on that one, guys, at all. Marshall, like they're just looting the public coffers. Everybody understands that, right? They're looting the public coffers, sending it off to their friends, their boondoggles, right down to the, there was that contract during the early pandemic for, the ventilators. Did they ever get made? Did that guy, that former liberal who started a company when the pandemic hit ever produce any ventilators? Probably not. Okay. So, Marcia replied that she wanted to know why none of this was in the legislation to set up the fund, which, in addition to the $2 billion of government money, seeks to attract billions more, a total of $15 billion for the fund. Quote, you're saying, give me the $2 billion, I'll buy some shares, but the company doesn't even exist, close quote. An exasperated Marshall said. Her complaint was completely valid and remains so now, 1 month after Bill C-32 passed and became law. The committee meeting on December 7th, 2022 received little notice beyond a mention in the Globe and Mail about the issue, but a video tweeted last week has been seen nearly 900,000 times now, far more than that would see in a regular Senate committee meeting. As for Bill C-32, it passed and received royal assent, becoming law on December 15th, despite opposition from Marshall and other senators. Give me a break. So just throwing $2 billion out the door to a corporation that might get set up at some point in the future. So Trudeau government had months to devise a structure. The government announced the Canada Growth Fund in the 2022 federal budget, which was tabled on April 7th. They didn't include the $2 billion in funding in the budget, but introduced that with few details in November's fall economic statement. Bill C-32 simply stated that, Quote, the Minister of Finance may acquire a hold on behalf of His Majesty in the right of Canada non-voting shares of a corporation that is incorporated as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Canada Development Investment Corporation, and it is responsible for administering the Canada Growth Fund, close quote. There was a total of 3 paragraphs in the main body of the bill discussing the Canada Growth Fund, and none of it was about the structure of this corporation. The goal of the Canada Growth Fund, according to the government, is to, quote, attract the significant private capital required to accelerate the deployment of technologies required to decarbonize and grow their economies, close quote. Garbly-gook. That's a legitimate function of government, whether you agree with the policy or not. It's the type of thing governments do all the time. Yeah, okay. The problem with the Canada Growth Fund is the way the Trudeau Liberals have handled it is their pay me now, I'll tell you later approach. Asking for the $2 billion to buy shares in a company that does not exist and where the government offers no information on the structure or governance should not be acceptable. It isn't acceptable. None of this is acceptable. The government's own backgrounder on the fund states that it doesn't have the information on how it will run and adds that it will come in, quote, the first half of 2023, close quote. So MPs and senators voted for this money to be spent in November and December with no idea on how it will be monitored until perhaps next June. That's not good fiscal stewardship or governance, but this is indicative of how the Trudeau government operates these days. Yeah, I mean, he announced on a Zoom there that, you know, the pandemic was an opportunity to accelerate their plans. So, I mean, they announced that they were going to use the pandemic to exploit Canadians, and that's exactly what they're doing. While everybody's completely deranged in this shroud of fear, they're looting the public coffers. Okay, and Sam Harris was trending in Canada, and full disclosure, I was a pretty great admirer of Sam Harris for many years. I believe I read The End of Faith while I was on my way to Afghanistan, actually, and it was a real eye-opener and a game changer for me, right up until like the last chapter, which was all about meditation. And at that point in my life, I was just like, okay, you lost me, whatever, man. You're just a California liberal. But eventually I did come around, and, you know, I'm a big proponent of meditation these days, and really, like, it's all because of Sam Harris. But then Trump derangement syndrome set in, and he's just lost. Like, he is just beyond at this point. But it's actually trending in Canada, so I think this is interesting. Here we have Jimmy Dore. I'm for censorship if it helps my side politically. I mean, I just can't see a downside in thinking like this because I don't read history and I'm super smarter than you. At Sam Harris, John Howard. Yeah, that's pretty much the size of it. And I heard last night, I was listening to Gad Saad's podcast. If you haven't checked him out, he's a professor from Montreal. He wrote The Parasitic Mind, and he's got a pretty good podcast. He only does like 10 minutes here and 5 minutes there, but he's a real wise ass, and he's pretty smart, man. He's a funny guy. So check that out. And here's what happened with Sam. Okay.
I mean, Hunter Biden, at that point, Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared, right? It's like, there's nothing. First of all, it's Hunter Biden, right? It's not Joe Biden, but even if whatever scope of Joe Biden's corruption is, like if we could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly and understand that he's getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's deals in Ukraine or wherever else, right? Or China, it is infinitesimal compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in. It's like a firefly to the sun, right? I mean, like there's just, it doesn't even stack up against Trump University, right? Trump University as a story is worse than anything that could be in Hunter Biden's laptop, in my view, right? Now that doesn't answer the people who say it's still completely unfair to not have looked at the laptop in a timely way and to have shut down the New York Post's Twitter account. Like that's just a conspiracy. That's a left-wing conspiracy to deny the presidency to Donald Trump? Absolutely, it was. Absolutely, right? But I think it was warranted, right? And again, it's a coin toss as to whether or not
Sam, I'm sorry.
that particular piece.
I'm really sorry. I was the one that said we should move on, but you've just said something I really struggle with there, which is
the kids in the basement.
No, fuck the kids in the basement. I'm interested in democracy. You're saying you are content with a left-wing conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically re-elected as president.
Well, no, I'm content. Well, but the thing is, it's just not left-wing, right? So Liz Cheney is not left-wing, right? Liz Cheney is doing everything in her power.
You're content with a conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically elected.
But there's nothing conspiracy. It's not. It was a conspiracy out in the open. But it doesn't matter if it was. It doesn't matter what part's conspiracy, what part's out in the open. I mean, I think it's like if people get together and talk about what should we do about this phenomenon. You know, if it's like if there was an asteroid hurtling toward Earth, and we got in a room together with all of our friends and had a conversation about what we could do to deflect.
Guys, I just want to point out, I know this is it's a bit agitating, but this is like one of the most prominent intellectuals on the left right now. Okay.
Its course, right? Is that a conspiracy? You know, like some of
this is one of the most prominent intellectuals on the left. Like this is Sam Harris. And look at these guys. These young guys are looking back at him like, okay, boomer. That's perfect. Just look at their faces. Yeah, okay, boomer. Okay, and here's Viva Fry. He's tweeting about it. What an amazing thought experiment from Sam Harris. Had it been true, had it been a true pandemic, and had we had a functional vaccine, people would have reacted very differently. Genius. I never knew Sam Harris before his TDS. Did he ever say anything intelligent? Yes, he really did. I've read like all of his books. He was fabulous. I used to say he was the most rational human being on the planet. And then all of a sudden, it was just like he didn't get his way with the Trump presidency. And he just totally fell apart. I don't know what to tell you. He's just a California liberal. I guess I was kind of right. My first impressions are, you ever notice that? How your first impressions are so often honest, really right. But you know what? I learned a lot. I learned a lot reading his books and stuff like that. And I do think that I have used his arguments from the moral landscape, for example, when it comes to making the ethical argument, putting human dignity at the center of your ethics framework, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, he has done some great work in the past, but he's completely deranged, as he has been since 2016. It's incredible. I used to listen to his podcast. I can't anymore. I can't. I had the first Sam Harris podcast. I listened to the first one. And I've been listening to it ever since, and I just can't. Ever since 2016, it's just insane how deranged he really is. But anyway, here's Sam.
Take it back to COVID for a second. In one way, we got very lucky that COVID wasn't worse than it was, right? You know, it could have been much, much worse. It could have been 10 times as deadly, or 50 times as deadly, and we would have lived through, or many of us wouldn't have lived through something truly awful.
Okay. I got to say this now before I forget, but the concept of like cognitive dissonance, this capacity that people have to hold two mutually exclusive positions at the same time, like to be able to bend and twist your logic around to the point, you know, that you can believe that day is night and night is day. And you see this a lot, I think, on the left with the ideological stuff, you know, where people will cleave to this ideological position, no matter how much data you throw at them, no matter how much reality just keeps crashing up against them. And they'll still say, you know, no, men are women and women are men and stuff like this. But here's a really good example of cognitive dissonance on the part of Sam Harris. And I first came to understand what cognitive dissonance really was through Sam Harris's work. So this is just a surreal experience for me to watch the Trump derangement syndrome of Sam Harris.
But had COVID been worse, you know, just enough worse to really get our attention, to really be undeniable, we would have had a different political conversation around it. There wouldn't have been the same kind of vaccine skepticism. Brett Weinstein would not have been releasing 80 straight podcasts on the dangers of the vaccine if a few variables were changed. I mean, just take that, leave COVID exactly as it is, but just make it preferentially dangerous to children rather than to old people, right? You just flip that around, the variable of age. If kids were dying by the hundreds of thousands from COVID at a rate of whatever it was, 1%, say, but if it was pretty much all kids, we would have had a very different experience, right? And the patience, that there would have been no fucking patience for vaccine skepticism, right? And everyone would have recognized that this is not my body, my choice. This is, you're not going to kill my kids with your ignorance, right? And you change one other variable. What if the vaccines actually really did?
It's unbelievable. Like I always knew him to be very stoic, and he's just lost. He's completely emotive.
Block transmission much better than they in fact did, right? And there was a moment where it was only rational to expect them to block transmission. Turns out they don't do it nearly as much as we would hope at this point. They just shorten the window by which, during which transmission is possible.
Well, they announced that the window itself is a lot shorter than they initially promised. And he's just coming to that realization. He's saying a lot of things, I understand, that many of us have known all along, because we were really paying attention to the data. And astonishingly to me, Sam Harris is paying attention to the media.
If they're even doing that now, I don't know. But let's say the vaccines really did block transmission, but then nothing else was, all of the other mishigas about how, untested they are and how dangerous they yet might be, and the spike protein and blah, blah, blah. Leave all that in place. Just give me a little more transmission blockage and give me kids being preferentially killed or injured by this disease. The obscenity of much of what was
what do you call skepticism? Like, I would call just data orientation. Like, I'm a very data oriented guy. So, I actually looked at the data when I made my decision. It was just like, well, I mean, I'm not any more at risk than I would be if I got the flu. As a matter of fact, I'm less at risk of dying. And, there's an unknown risk associated with the vaccine. And that was all I really needed. That was to make that decision at that moment in time. And so all of this stuff that he's talking about like, just change all of the variables in this equation, and I'm still right. It's amazing.
What much of what was said about COVID at the time at which it was said, the conspiracy thinking, the platforming of people who were obviously unwell and unbalanced professionally and mentally around vaccines and their skepticism. The patience for that would have been non-existent, right? And so
that's an emotional argument.
So in some sense, we got unlucky.
In other words, a non sequitur, and like not a valid argument. Like I said, the only two data points I really needed were my, were the risk of dying from COVID and the risk for dying from the flu. I looked at that and I said, well, I never took a flu shot, so I'm good to go. And all the rest of it is like, I was naturally immune before they even called the pandemic, for crying out loud. And I haven't been sick since January of 2020. And so all of this stuff about I still need to take a jab because he's really invested in this cause emotionally. And if we just change all the variables, you can see how invested emotionally everybody else would be. They would be as invested as I am. It really is just astonishing to watch what's happened to Sam Harris over the last few years.
At how benign this was and how mysterious it could yet seem, because yeah, you could run the argument. Well, did he die from COVID or with COVID? He was 80 years old, right? We, you know, that was the situation we were in. I'm saying that there are changes in the real world that could have happened and could yet happen that would have been immensely clarifying, right? And there just would have been no less. I'm just asking questions routine would have not gotten anyone anywhere worth going, right? And that's I think part of what we're talking about here is, with respect to Trump and with respect to COVID, are just contingent facts of these, unique situations, which had they been a little bit different, we wouldn't have fragmented in the same way, right? You dial up the risk of COVID, or if COVID just had been, just made you physically ugly, right? Like if COVID was monkeypox, right? And you had pustules on your face, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's different than the hypothetical experience we all had of, is it a cold? Is it a flu? Is it COVID? Who knows? I'm not saying I wish for those things, because those are pictures of a worse suffering for people. But had those things been in place, I just don't think we would have witnessed the same kind of shattering of our society around this particular variable. And again, so I pivot back to the possibility that if we could get a more normal Republican candidate who was not not at the center of a personality cult built on misinformation.
I actually hate Donald Trump's personality. I kind of laugh. I do think he's kind of buffoonish in the way that he acts, actually. But in terms of the policy he pursues, it's just masterful. So,
that
and okay, that's enough of Sam Harris making his emotive arguments. This is insane. And that's the thing is, I think the central theme here, in the arguments that he puts forth, is that if only people had been a hell of a lot more afraid than they were, they would have acted as hysterically as I did. And here we have, this is Lonnie Downing, I think. Okay.
First to arrive
Canadian,
with cameras installed to protect.
But this, I believe, is an Aussie guy.
Both you and me, in places that we weren't that threatened, and yet the people didn't see. And what followed were traffic restrictions to keep the roads quiet and clean. The maths didn't add up, nor the science, but still, the people didn't see. And next came the 15-minute neighbourhoods to make our lives easier, decreed. To some, it seemed like restrictions, but still, the people didn't see. And then came the digital ID, so convenient, easy, and free. Your life in one chip on a mainframe, and still, the people didn't see. The cars they sold were electric, all wired to the government PC, and they switched off the driving on Sundays, and still, the people didn't see. And the banks moved their money to digital, and the government banned cash the next week, and the ability to fly was restricted, and still, the people didn't see. They linked up your money and profile to the ID on the government PC, and connected it to social media, and still, the people didn't see. And then came a new cure, a new virus, safe and effective and free. They linked these jabs to your profile and connected the government PC. And when the people were locked in their cities, policed by their digital ID, unable to visit their loved ones, now, finally, the people can see. Restricted and tracked with no money. To go further, a permit you'll need, contained in your digital city. Oh, why did the people not see? These steps they've sold us as progress never looked to be quite what they seemed. And if you don't ask the questions and protest, then your children will never know. Free. There's no adverts on this video, so please get it shared.
There you go. Jeff, buy cars. Yeah, somebody's asking if I can post this.
First to arrive.
Let's shut that down. Wait a second. You guys somebody was asking if I could put this in the comments. Let me just snag that for you. And I'll post it out to our profiles. There we go. Wait. Okay, yeah, I just posted it in the tweet in the comments there, guys. So anybody who wants to share that out, make it viral. Okay, and here is Knuckle Girl, and she's saying that South Australia trials comprehensive facial recognition technology. Here in Canada, we've only been a few months behind Australia with their hashtag NWO bullshit. And this is more resist the WF. This is trending in Canada right now. Hashtag Trudeau must go. So a lot of people are getting active, I think. The Twitter battle space is a buzzing. So yeah, this is what the poem is about, really. I think referencing right now is this idea that basically the Chinese social credit system has come to Australia. And yeah, I think Canada, he's right when he's, this person is right here, Knuckle Girl, when she says that Canada is probably only a few months behind Australia. Now, I don't know, it's tough to say who got more extreme there, but there were some very serious like acts of police violence in Australia, and they had people going off to camps. But like, geez, it's hard to. We had people doing the same thing, right? We had like the isolation hotels, and they built isolation camps. So I mean, are they going to go unused? What's next? But anyway, we're only a few months behind these guys. I agree. And that's probably, you look to a place like Sweden and other, Western first world countries, Sweden, and like some of the Nordic countries like Norway have been pretty good. And you got to wonder like what it is, what the difference really is. And I would say CCP influence. That's probably what the difference is there. We're just a little, they got their tentacles into us a little bit more than they do the Nordic countries, probably.
Its elaborate security camera network is about to be supercharged, giving authorities the ability to trace individuals using facial recognition. Police say it would be a crime-fighting game changer, but critics warn it's a major threat to privacy.
Eyes in the sky are nothing new to our city, but they've never been able to do this. One scan of your face and your whole identity can be revealed.
It feels like it's like an invasion of privacy sometimes. It doesn't make me feel safe. It doesn't feel good to be watched.
Facial and number plate recognition technology is about to be rolled out in the CBD, matching faces to databases provided by the government or private companies. It'll give police unprecedented power to track and arrest suspects.
We're in the business of solving crime, and if we have technology that makes it more easy for us to do that, then we're going to take advantage of that.
But that's exactly what they've been asked not to do yet. The Australian Human Rights Commission says new privacy laws are needed first.
People could be misidentified, unfairly targeted, and the data collected could be misused.
This is a real concern, and it should be addressed before we see this rolled out across the city.
And facial recognition technology is still far from perfect. It relies on data to create facial matches, and most of that data is on white males. It means it's less effective at identifying women and people of colour.
In some cases, if somebody is a person of colour, that face print can be wrong more than 4 out of 5 times. And it means that there'll be more racist policing.
The City Council, which owns the cameras, will meet next Tuesday. If it votes to approve the new technology for use, we'll be the first state in Australia to do so without regulation.
There you go. CCP social credit system coming to the West. We're only a few months behind these guys. Okay, this is BioWolf, and he says Hammerhead Garage is right, and it's going to take more than Trudeau and his brain dead flunkies to take my personal property from me. So this is about the confiscation in PEI. That's where they were planning to trial the firearms confiscation in PEI first, of course, because they're a small province and they're out here in the East Coast, which is usually pretty deep red territory. So they thought they were going to be easy to push around, but it looks like they're going to be backing off it. But here is this guy.
This week on Marketplace.
I'm afraid for the children and then, what they've been exposed to.
Insulation nightmares.
I think we've got what we need for the lab.
I got that.
It's a popular energy
Video
saver.
down here. Pardon me, guys. Replay. Let's do it that way.
What's going on, guys? Sean here from Hammerhead. I want to talk to you today about this latest thing you're reading in the news about PEI and the hunting tools confiscation that's supposedly taking place. Well, it just so happens that I'm from there, and I know that province, and I know the people in it. Not all anymore, because it's been infiltrated by a lot of folks from Ontario and other places that don't exactly have the same way of thinking or values as they do in the island. But irregardless of all that, I know the conversations that are taking place right now behind closed doors because I'm privy to all that. And I can tell you for a fact that there won't be many people that will be giving up their hunting tools. In fact, almost nobody. They're picking on PEI because it's a liberal stronghold in the east. It's a small little province. It's an island, and there's no way for them to call for backup if they get in a bad way. I'm praying this doesn't get ugly because I got a feeling that it might. And all it takes is one spark. That's all it takes. And don't you think for a second that they don't know that. Okay, it only takes one spark. And they're not going to give up nothing. First of all, it's not lawful what they're doing. Second of all, it's certainly not legal because it hasn't been made law. It's not even been it's not law. It's just what they want to do.
Yeah.
And anyone that's been in Canada the last 3 years can attest to is the fact that they just make it up as they go along. Parliamentary debate or making an actual law with the will of the people being heard is no longer needed in this country, period. So this could be really, really bad, and I pray that it doesn't get bad. And I hope you guys will help me out and pray that it doesn't turn into something that I think it quite possibly could. Because I know they think that people in the East are weak, but I can tell you right now, there's more strength here than you even realize. And because I know the culture, I'm immersed in it. It's like being a German and living your whole life in Germany, and then you have somebody from North America trying to talk about Germans. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, just an update. There hasn't been any confiscation as of yet. But there's been several videos in the last little while from the CCFR, the Canadian Coalition of Firearms Owners. And if you're not a member of that group, even if you're not a firearms owner, I highly suggest that you go, for the sake of liberty and individual freedom, go and join that group. I'll put a link in the description there for how to join that group. I have a membership. All my friends have memberships. People I know from every province in Canada pretty well have memberships to that. But I think if their resolve was as strong as they think it is, why wouldn't they start in a province like Alberta? Why wouldn't you start there if you think you have all the ends sewn up and it's gonna be a cakewalk, eh? Would you like to have that job of going door to door? I know I wouldn't. And it's gonna get bad if they start pushing. If they really want to push this, it's going to get ugly. This could be the very thing that's the tipping point that sends us over the edge into the oblivion. So anyway, pray that doesn't happen, like I said. And I hate coming on here and always being the bearer of bad news. I really do. I wish I could come on here and show you my vacation photos and speak of lovely things that I've done all the time and how, my trips in nature and all that. But that's just not the reality we're living in at the moment, guys. As you know, right? So in any case, give it some thought, give it some prayer, and also support firearms owners' rights any way you can, including joining these organizations, even if you don't own a firearm. That's all I got to say. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, I don't think the East really fits into the category. I'm just going to say this as, I'm a Maritimer, and this guy is talking about the Maritimes, and I can see that Darlene is, a few people are commenting from the Maritimes here. So And Darlene is saying we should share this heavily in the Maritimes. And, I never promote my own stuff. It seems I'm terrible for that. But yeah, start sharing this stuff out, guys. We got to beat these algorithms, and check us out on Rumble, because that's the only place I'm really allowed to talk. Yeah, the Maritimes, I think, doesn't fit neatly into the category of the East, like many of my Albertan brothers are often want to do. They talk about the East, and they kind of put the Maritimes in with the Laurentians, and we tend to think of them as upper Canadians. The Laurentian elites. We tend to think of them as upper Canadians, and the East tends to be liberal, as I've pointed out to some of my Albertan brothers on previous podcasts, because they won't let us work out here. So everybody who pursues a serious career or a serious kind of full-time work and stuff like this, like to make serious money, you have to leave the Maritimes, because they basically have these monopolies on resources around here, and they're tightly restricted, and they won't let us mine uranium, for example, or do any deep sea drilling or shale or anything. So we have to go to Alberta, where you're allowed to develop your natural resources in order to get those big paying jobs. And so what remains tends to be kind of dependent on, not what remains, but the people that remain tend to be kind of dependent on these government programs, like, say, for example, employment insurance, because there's seasonal work that needs to be done. And that's how the government, I guess, facilitates seasonal work, is, through the paying of these EI checks seasonally and stuff like that. So people do tend to favor governments that bolster these programs, the people who remain for the most part. But what we've seen happen here recently too is there's been a great migration back, and there's also a lot of Ontarians and Albertans showing up here as well, because this is the only place that you can buy real estate in Canada these days. So a lot of the folks that don't, that are transient and doing camp work and rotational stuff, they're making their way here. So it's pretty interesting. But what I want to point out too is the transient nature of the Maritimers, especially my generation. We're disproportionately represented in the military as well. And that's always kind of been the case for the Atlantic provinces and Cape Breton, the home of my heart. So there's a sort of disproportionate number of veterans in the region. That's what I've kind of been noticing throughout the course of this crisis. Is it's like the Maritimes chapter of Veterans for Freedom has been pretty darn active, man. We're all over the place. There's always speaking engagements and a lot of stuff going on in that regard. So there's a pretty active freedom movement out here in the Maritimes, despite what you see on the electoral map. So it's a bit of a different animal. I don't think it fits neatly into that category of the East, the way that people want to lump us in with the liberals in Upper Canada, because we're not those kinds of liberals. We're not out of touch in the same way as the cosmopolitan elites are. People are pretty down to earth, really. Whether they tend to want to bolster those programs, or they tend to go elsewhere to seek their fortune. So here's Matt Taibbi, and he's releasing the Twitter files number 14th. This is back on January 12th, so it's a few days ago, but it's the Russiagate lies. So number one here is the fake tale of Russian bots and the hashtag release the memo hashtag. So this is making its way around the Twitterverse here. Hashtag release the memo. And this was all about evidence that there were any kind of Russian bots that, stole the election for Donald Trump, or that were, I think what it was the conspiracy at the time that they were trying to shut down, which wasn't a conspiracy at all. It was, that there had been the conspiracy that Sam Harris was just talking about actually happened. But what they were trying to say was that it was all Russian bots making this stuff up about a left-wing conspiracy to basically steal the election from Donald Trump, however you want to define that, because they broke election law all over the country. And there was, that one, whatever it was like a class action or a mass tort where the state of Texas was actually, they wanted to go to the Supreme Court there against Pennsylvania because they broke their own election laws. And, they basically tipped the balance of the election. Anyway, I'm not going to get all the details right here, but if you go back and you look it up, you'll see that basically all the other states joined on to that lawsuit, and then the Supreme Court was like, "Oh, it's moot," and they didn't even hear it. So it's pretty crazy. And the Russiagate stuff was all this gaslighting campaign. But here's what they're talking about. This is the release the memo. It's the Nunez memo. It's a Spanish name, guys. I've heard this said a lot, and I think it is a Spanish name, right? I think it's Nunez. A lot of people say Nunes, but I don't think that's right. So the Nunez memo, formerly titled the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, abuses at the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is a 4-page memo written for U.S. Representative Devin Nunes by his staff and released to the public by the Republican Control Committee on February 2nd, 2018. The alleged memo that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, quote, may have relied on politically motivated or questionable sources, close quote, to obtain a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant in October 2016 and in 3 subsequent renewals of Trump advisor Carter Page in the early phases of the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 United States election. So this is Spygate in a nutshell, what they're talking about. And that was where the Obama administration, turned the security apparatus of the United States government on a peaceful citizen, Donald Trump, as he was running for office. And Carter Page, I think, turned out to be a CIA asset, didn't he? So, and they unmasked General Flynn, and it was basically the deep state's takedown of General Flynn, because he had always been kind of a problem for the guys in Washington from their view, because he tended to think that they were full of shit, and the best intelligence is at the tactical level in the field overseas. And he had a very different approach to foreign policy, and he was in Donald Trump's inner circle, and he was going to be derailing, I think, a lot of those deep state plans for the Middle East and elsewhere. So he needed to be taken out, and that's what happened. Is they unmasked him. They caught him in a perjury trap there, because if you lie to the FBI, then it's perjury in the United States. And they went in and asked him a question. What was it? It was whether he had any contact with the Russians leading up to the 2016 election, or whatever it was, whether he'd had any contact with the Russians. And he was like, no, of course not. And then they did a tour. It was like a casual visit. They didn't even really tell him that it was a formal affair. But because he thought they meant any kind of collusion or anything nefarious, he said no. And then what they nailed him on was he had a conversation with the Russian ambassador, when he was getting ready to assume the role of, I think it was National Security Advisor. And he was like, what was the issue at the time? He was saying, yeah, don't worry about it, because Obama closed some embassies or something like that, and told the Russians, they blamed the Russians for Donald Trump's election and went after them. And then General Flynn made a phone call to his counterpart and said, yeah, okay, don't worry about it. We'll get the new administration in place. We're going to revisit everything. So just relax and don't do anything rash, and that's what they nailed him on. They said, there you go. You talked to them and you lied. So that's perjury. And they went after his son, and everything was a very greasy thing. So release the memo. What's the conspiracy behind the right-wing meme? Republicans claim a secret document reveals Hillary Clinton's plot, quote, worse than Watergate, close quote. And they're getting boosted. They're getting a big boost from Russian bots. Yeah. So this is the Rolling Stone. Aren't these guys supposed to be pop culture? And well, I guess, yeah, okay, there's a politics heading here, but this is just pure left-wing propaganda at this point. Okay. On a day like Friday, with the shutdown looming at the DACA and DACA in the balance and Chuck Schumer huddling with President Trump in the White House, you might logically expect right-wing Twitter to be blowing up, but not necessarily with the seemingly unacceptable hashtag that's dominated the platform since Thursday evening, hashtag release the memo. But then again, you might logically expect American conservatives to work in concert with Russian state propagandists and Twitter bots, though by now, God knows, nobody should be surprised. It's just... unbelievable. That's okay. So the quote memo in question is a confidential 4-page document assembled by a stealthy group of House Republicans led by Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes over the past month. These members, as part of the GOP effort to discredit Robert Mueller and demolish his investigation into the Trump campaign's Russian collusion, overtook to, quote, probe whether the FBI and Justice Department misuse in the infamous dossier compiled by British intelligence expert Christopher Steele. Surprisingly enough, they seem to have found what they set out to find, judging at least from the dark and hysterical hints about the contents of the memo that right-wingers in Congress began to issue last evening. So I like how this is pure propaganda. The way they're putting the word memo in these mocking kind of quotes, as well as the word probe, when they say probe, whether the FBI Justice Department misused the infamous dossier, but they say British intelligence expert Christopher Steele. Now, the thing is that the FISA court actually issued a ruling in a very rare kind of public statement. They issued a ruling and they said that was an abuse. It was a gross abuse. Had they had any idea that the Steele dossier was so flimsy, then they never would have given the warrant to spy on Carter Page, and the whole Spygate thing never would have happened. So it was a total fraud. It was Oppo research. It was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, and it was just a fake dossier compiled to smear Donald Trump, and they used it to get that Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant to turn the security apparatus of the American government against a political opponent of Hillary Clinton's. So Mark Meadows, chairman of the hard-right House Freedom Caucus, declared himself, quote, shocked to the core by his fellow Republicans' findings and demanding they be released, quote, so that all Americans can judge for themselves, close quote, adding, quote, part of me wishes that I didn't read it because I don't want to believe those kinds of things could be happening in this country that I call home and love so much, close quote. Releasing a 4-page partisan memo is the last best hope to, quote, preserve our democracy, close quote, according to Republican Matt Gaetz. Another Freedom Caucus member, Republican Lee Zeldin, a New York Republican, was among those who dashed to the House floor to sputter, quote, the American people deserve, they want to know what's in this document. Release the memo and all of the related document source in the memo, close quote. So you can see how the propaganda works here. Like they're every time they another Freedom Caucus member. So I don't want to believe those kinds of things are happening. This is just, it's pure drivel, right? It's they mock all the people that are for the releasing of this memo, which, by the way, would be the transparent thing to do, and much more, I think, indicative of Western values and transparency and honesty than not releasing the memo. But this is just an incredible piece of propaganda to somehow convince the reader to to stigmatize these people in this movement and somehow emotionally condition the reader to reject whatever the findings are that will come out from the releasing of the memo. So on Thursday night's Hannity, the host held a show by calling the memo's findings, whatever they might be, quote, worse than Watergate, close quote, borrowing from the ultra-reliable Republican Steve King. How so? Quote, what we're talking about tonight is the systemic abuse of power, the weaponizing of those powerful tools of intelligence, and the shredding of the Fourth Amendment constitutional rights, close quote, Hannity declared. Details, of course, were not forthcoming, but Hannity knows what he knows. And rest assured, it's more than enough to justify putting a swift end to Mueller's Trump, quote, witch hunt, close quote. Don Jr. signaled this morning that he'd gotten the message loud and clear. So here's Donald J. Trump on Twitter. They're showing, and he says, the Democrats are lucky, Republicans are honorable people. If we played the game like they do, the memo would be all over CNN and everywhere else by now. Maybe it's time we stoop to their level. Hashtag release the memo. So anyway, I'm going to forego the rest of that article because it's pretty terrible. But just a reminder, this was 10% for the big guy. So this was making the rounds as well as with the release of the memo stuff.
Joe Biden, because that's how Joe was identified by his son's business partners.
Hang on here. I want to get a full screen.
In communications found on the Hunter Biden laptop from hell. In fact, Hunter's partners mentioned a plan to set aside 10% for the big guy. Now, these emails referenced by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post and the Washington Post and New York Magazine and almost every other outlet in the country in America reveal a highly unethical get-rich-quick scheme where the Biden family collected millions of dollars from sketchy foreign nationals all over the world using Hunter, who had pretty much zero experience, to lead the way. Now, keep in mind, shady foreign nationals, they weren't paying millions of dollars for Hunter's business expertise. He was well known to be unstable, also a drug user, an addict, and had a lot of serious problems.
Yeah. So different picture when you actually show what their people are saying. So, yeah, I just moved this one ahead a little bit, but okay, here's Devin Nunes here on the left, and here he goes.
But look, remember what happened here. In 2016, Donald Trump caught everybody by surprise by using social media successfully to win the election. After that point, Obama specifically went to Zuckerberg. They went to Twitter. So this was part of an ongoing process through 17 and 18. They all knew the Russia hoax was exactly that, a hoax. And their goal was not to just control the fake news, but to control the delivery of the fake news, which poisoned the American people. And I bet if you did a poll today, I bet you would still have half of America, maybe more. They would think that Trump and Republicans had something to do with Russia, and it's a shame.
That is really a shame. Stephen Miller, you were there the whole time. You followed this daily as we did. We all knew it was a lie. There was no evidence that backed up what they said. But the congenital liar, the Democrats, the media mob, they pushed that phony conspiracy theory and rammed it down the throats of every American that I think Devin is right. People would believe it.
Well, these Twitter files are positively explosive. They document how after Devin Nunes courageously stepped forward and published this memo.
So I got a big kick out of this guy. I've seen him handle the press corps pretty masterfully during the Trump administration. Stephen Miller, yeah, that's his name. He's pretty good.
Documenting illegal spying on the president, documenting the Russia hoax. After he bravely stepped forward this memo, people like Adam Schiff and Dianne Feinstein and Senator Blumenthal concocted and pushed a phony story suggesting that Russian bots were promoting this to try to taint the memo, to try to taint this congressman. So what we see here is a systematic pattern where the people who point and say Russia collusion, they are the ones interfering in our democracy. They are the ones that are spreading lies that poison the well of the American republic. They are the ones who must be held accountable. And I'm so gratified to see, for example, that Adam Schiff, lying liar that he is, has been booted from the Intelligence Committee.
You know, Devin, as I look at this, you go back to 2016, the only people buying, bought and paid for Russian misinformation, that was Hillary. The only one that talked to a Russian that said they had compromising materials on Trump, naked pictures. That would be the congenital liar, Adam Schiff. If you look at where the money went from the communist Chinese, our number one geopolitical foe, that went to the Biden family. the Ukraine. I'm withholding $1 billion until you fire a prosecutor investigating my son who admits he has no experience in oil. The one doing a big oil deal with China is Hunter. The family that's getting a $5 million no-interest forgivable loan, that's the Bidens. The ones getting the money from Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, China, that's all them, Devin. The very thing they accuse Republicans of, they're guilty of.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right here. And the
I'm not a big fan of Hannity, but
question is now, what's going to happen? I mean, look, President Trump and I were very supportive of Elon Musk buying this company. And I think we've been surprised that Elon has been willing to put all of this out. And I think the new Republican Congress should actually subpoena or request from Twitter this information so that they can go through it. It's been great that Matt Taibbi and others have gone through it and they're putting out these reports. But also, this is only the tip of the iceberg. We're only looking at Twitter, and Twitter is a small piece of the pie. Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, they're the big boy on the block here, Sean. They've been shadow banning, they've been doing nasty things, and they spent, after Donald Trump uses Facebook successfully to get elected in 2016, did it the right way before they were shadow banning, then they turn around, they start to shadow ban us, they put pressure on these tech companies, and then Zuckerberg puts in over $400 million.
And it gets worse.
Into the 2020 election.
They have an FBI guy that writes a thesis in college about how Trump colluded with Russia. He heads up a group of FBI agents talking to big tech companies every single week, warning them there might be a misinformation campaign in the 2020 race, and it might be about Hunter, at least according to the integrity head at Twitter, this guy, Mr. Roth. We got to roll. Devin, you've been vindicated. Steve Miller, so have you. And so is this show.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox.
Okay, so Hannity doing a little victory lap there, I think. But yeah, this Twitter files thing is pretty darn big. And, I know it's taking quite a while, especially since, well, the election was in 2020 now, but a lot of this stuff is finally kind of coming home to roost. And, it's this is just what it takes. I think this is how long it takes when we're living in a peaceful society, and instead of just going to civil war, the legal system is a hell of a lot slower than a bloody revolution, but it's definitely the way to go in terms of alleviating human suffering in the future. So here's the real Andy Lee show again. And she says, here's the video from CBC News of her being restrained for not wearing a mask. Afterwards, her lifeless body was wheeled away. A coroner's report stated that she died from a brain injury resulting from a lack of oxygen, quote, due to restraint asphyxia following a struggle and exertion. So this is Canada. Okay, if you're just listening, woman doesn't want to wear a mask. So the healthcare workers are talking to her, and you got the security guys putting their, camera turns away. And she's being wheeled out on a gurney or wheelchair of some kind, lifeless. Yeah. Like how the security camera turns to the side there, huh? That's what's going on in Canada, folks. Yep, they're all getting ready to just manhandle this woman because she refuses to wear the face burqa. She's trying to walk away, and what are they doing? They're restraining her. Holy smokes. They turn the security camera up the hall so you can't even see what they're doing to her. And then they wheel her out lifeless. And that's Canada. So this was, we're on to this segment of the show now. We can talk about the vaccine stuff, I guess. So, yeah, Patty is saying they killed her, no doubt, and no investigation. Well, the coroner even says it's asphyxia. So that's lack of oxygen to the brain, but it says following struggle and exertion. Struggle and exertion. Was she vaxxed? Well, We may never know. But we were talking about this recently. I've been discussing how I think well, not I think, but the data that I've seen would seem to indicate that there's some immunosuppression due to the vaccine going on. The thing is that Fauci is on the record. He's on video saying that they spliced in a little bit of the HIV virus into the mRNA jab so that it would kind of suppress the immune system in order to improve the mRNA uptake, which the body would otherwise attack as a foreign protein. So, and now it's a question of, well, what happens? How do we get these immune systems back on? Or there's a resurgence of a lot of these different ailments that basically people can carry the pathogens around with them, and as long as their immune system is healthy, it's not a big deal. But once it's suppressed, you start to see symptoms manifest, I think, for a lot of these things that people are probably carriers for that they wouldn't otherwise know about had it not been for the immunosuppression resulting from the mRNA jabs. Okay, so here's your story at a glance. I feel like I'm hearing something here, like one of my tabs is still chirping at me. 1 second here. Close these buggers. And here we have the Defender, and they're saying the story at a glance. I like that they have the bullets here at the top. These are usually pretty good journals. But story at a glance. According to the recent case study, persistent post-jab shingles were associated with the presence of the COVID-19 jab spike protein in the affected skin. The researchers speculate that the COVID-19 jab may induce persistent shingles reactivation by perturbing the immune system. Another study details the cases of 6 patients with autoimmune inflammatory rheumatic diseases who developed shingles shortly after their Pfizer jabs. None of the healthy controls developed shingles post-jab. A systematic review also concluded that the COVID-19 jab increases the risk of shingles reactivation if you've had it before or have known risk factors for it. The COVID-19 shot suppressed your innate immune system by inhibiting the type 1 interferon pathway, which is the first stage response to all viral infections. Type 1 interferon also keeps latent viruses in check. So if your interferon pathway is suppressed, latent viruses can start to emerge. Type 1 interferon is suppressed by the jab because it responds to the viral RNA, and viral RNA is not present in the COVID-19 shot. The RNA is modified to look like human RNA, so the interferon pathway is not triggered. Okay, so that's pretty good breakdown there. The Defender is Children's Health and Defense. Is that I'm not sure if that's no, I don't think that's Robert Kennedy's, but anyway, I'm never really sure familiar with all of the stuff that I read on the show, but this is a pretty well written article. So according to a recent case study published by the Journal of Cutaneous Immunology and Allergy, persistent post-jab shingles, aka herpes zoster, an infection caused by a varicella zoster virus, is associated with the presence of COVID-19 jab spike protein in the infected skin. As explained by the authors, quote, since the campaign of vaccination against COVID-19 was started, a wide variety of cutaneous adverse effects after vaccination has been documented worldwide. Quote, varicella zoster virus, VZV, reactivation was reported. Reportedly the most frequent cutaneous reaction in men after administration of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, especially that one. Quote, a patient who had persistent skin lesions after the same one vaccination for over 3 months was investigated for VZV virus and any involvement of a vaccine-derived spike protein. Strikingly, the vaccine-encoded spike protein of the COVID-19 virus was expressed in the vesicular keratinocytes and endothelial cells in the dermis. Dermis is skin. So that's a lot of gobbledygook, I know, but anyway, They're quoting back to a lot of these different articles, these different scientific studies and stuff like that. It's a pretty good resource, and I find even just the story at a glance gives you a pretty good sense of what's happening here. And as you can see from these quotes, it really does look like immunosuppression all over the place. And I've been asking that question. I mean, if autoimmune deficiency syndrome, as in AIDS, if a syndrome is something that can have multiple causes or an unknown cause, then is this like a form of vaccine-induced AIDS? That's, I think, an important question to ask. Not to be alarmist or anything, but I'm still getting some kind of a video echo or something. I'm not sure what's going on here. Go away. All right, I think I got it this time, guys. Okay, this is Truth and Justice, and he says, breaking urgent news, German immunology professor warns, quote, every injected mRNA vaccine will cause severe damage in our body and must be forbidden, close quote. Who financed, the WHO, financed by Bill Gates, proclaims their intent to use mRNA vaccines for all vaccination on Earth. This cannot be allowed to happen. So.
Now, if I am here today, it's for a very special reason. 4 weeks ago, I don't know where you saw the video released by the WHO, where they proclaimed that it was their intent to introduce mRNA vaccines for all vaccinations on Earth, and then go from there to treatment of all other diseases, including cancer, etc. What people do not understand is that all mRNA vaccines are dangerous and are going to threaten life. It does not matter whether the vaccine encodes for the spike protein, for the measles protein, for rubella, for the flu. It does not matter at all. Why? Because the whole danger of the vaccine stems from the ability of the immune system to recognize non-self. This cannot be allowed to happen. Even if the WHO said so, don't. And remember, and this is the last thing I want to say, the WHO is a private club, like a private football club, a club that is being financed, has been financed at the top by what? Bill Gates. Bill Gates is now number 2. Who is the top financier? Germany. The German taxpayers are financing the WHO and enforcing mRNA vaccination. You can't do this. You can't let your children be vaccinated because they are changing mankind. All your personality is going to be changed. Your brain is being changed, and your heart is being weakened. Every injected mRNA vaccine is going to cause severe damage in our body and must be forbidden. Thank you.
There you go. Pretty powerful little 2-minute video. This is a German immunology professor. So, okay, this is a New York Post. These were the guys who were suppressed. They had the Hunter Biden laptop story there, so they were the ones that actually got suppressed. Leading into the 2020 election. So here we have CNN analyst slammed after writing COVID deaths are being overcounted. 2.5 years late. Yeah. So this was making the rounds there out in the Twitterverse. CNN medical analyst of the Washington Post columnist Dr. Lena Wen admitted in a column Friday that the medical community is, quote, overcounting, close quote, the amount of, quote, COVID deaths and hospitalizations, close quote. Wen, who writes an occasional Washington Post column, provided her observations on the pandemic, masking and other COVID-related subjects, cited sources claiming the most, quote, patients diagnosed with COVID are actually in the hospital for some other illness, close quote. The article titled, quote, we are overcounting COVID deaths and hospitalizations. That's a problem, close quote. Wen's observations prompted readers on Twitter to complain, stating that it's, quote, 2.5 years late, close quote. Wenberg Gaynor calling some apparent skepticism about the CDC's latest COVID-19 death stats. Quote, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the United States is experiencing around 400 COVID deaths every day. At that rate, there should be nearly 150,000 deaths a year. But are these Americans dying from COVID or with COVID, close quote. The doctor claimed that, quote, understanding this distinction is crucial to putting the continuing toll of the coronavirus into perspective. Determining how likely it is an infection will result in hospitalization or death helps people weigh their own risk, close quote. Spring 2021 had good evidence of less than 40% of child COVID admissions were incidental. 2021, Denmark announced they distinguished with versus from COVID hospitalizations. So this is this is coming from Denmark. I can see this is Tracy. I'm not going to say this right. Tracy Org, maybe, because she's got one of those. It's like an O with a line through it, but I guess it's Org, maybe. And she's a medical doctor and a PhD, according to her verified Twitter profile. And that's what she's saying is that Denmark announced that they made the distinction between dying with COVID and dying from COVID in the spring of 2021. And I was saying before how I find that the Nordic countries, they don't seem to be as controlled, as CCP controlled or influenced as say Australia or Canada, for example. And she's saying COVID positive deaths in Denmark in 2022, 60 to 70% incidental. Amazing how long it has taken the US to accept this is a problem. So that's because the CCP has their candidate running the country. And 60 to 70% incidental means, they weren't hospitalized or they didn't die from COVID. They just happened to have it. And here is the article itself. This is Lena Wen. And anyway, I'm gonna forego that for you guys. But we are overcounting COVID deaths and hospitalizations. That's a problem. So this is the Washington Post, the Washington Compost. And that's Jeff Bezos's newspaper. So this is a good sign. If Jeff Bezos, one of the guys who probably got the richest off of the pandemic from his ventures in Amazon, is finally letting the stranglehold on information counter to the narrative that got him even richer, then maybe there is some hope that the boomers can be rich enough at some point. Because that's kind of the question I've been asking is, how rich do they have to be to get them to leave the 6-month-olds alone? But this is a good sign. If Jeff Bezos is starting to relent a little bit, then hopefully things are going to start moving in the right direction here. So this is the Children's Health Defense. This is Robert F. Kennedy's hobby horse here, and it says breaking: CHD defeats New York State in healthcare workers' COVID mandate. So CHD being Children's Health Defense. So they're winning a lawsuit. This is an article. They're beating the New York State healthcare system in a lawsuit. So in a groundbreaking decision filed today, New York State Supreme Court Judge Gerard Neary held the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for healthcare workers is now, quote, null and void and of no effect, close quote. The court held that the New York State's Department of Health lacked the authority to impose such a mandate, as this power is reserved to the state legislature. Furthermore, the court found that the mandate was, quote, arbitrary and capricious, close quote, as COVID-19 vaccines do not stop transmission, vitiating any rational basis for the mandate. So I like that they use that word in there, arbitrary and capricious. That was, I remember Christopher Hitchens' quote where he says that arbitrarity and caprice are central to the essence of totalitarianism. And that's what we're seeing really across the board. That is the alarming trend. Okay, so the Children's Health Defense financed this lawsuit on behalf of the medical professionals for informed consent and several individuals, healthcare workers. Siate Gibson, a lead attorney, said, quote, this is a huge win for New York healthcare workers who have been deprived of their livelihoods for more than a year. It is a huge win for all New Yorkers who are facing dangerous and unprecedented healthcare worker shortages throughout New York State, close quote. And, I read this and I'm thinking about the Maritimes right now, especially Nova Scotia. We just had, somebody, it seems somebody's dropping dead on the floor of an emergency room, or after having spent 7 hours there and then left. here in Nova Scotia once a week. So anyway, for the last couple of weeks, it's been that way. But it's a very sad state of affairs. The only thing that healthcare system really serves is the bureaucrats, the managerial class. And I had a great conversation with Chris Milburn there last night about that, and just how what a gravy train it really is for those folks. The CHD President Mary Holland said, quote, "We are thrilled by this crucial win against the COVID vaccine mandate, correctly finding that any such mandate on this stage, given the current knowledge, is arbitrary. We hope that this decision will continue to trend towards lifting these dangerous and unwarranted vaccine mandates throughout the country," close quote. We're off to a great start in 2023. So there you go, folks. It's not Canada, but it's New York State. And I would say that, the Maritimes are kind of like the Northeast. Like, we're part of the Northeast more so. I'll give you that as a kind of orientation for the Westerners out there. Well, I'm from Cape Breton, and we're well known for, fighting and drinking too much, kind of having a lot of jack guys running around, and really nice beaches. So we're basically like the Jersey Shore of Canada. Forget about it, So I think that at one point, even Acadia was contemplating, going the way of New England, joining forces with Maine and places like that, and kind of doing its own thing at one point in our history. But ultimately, we ended up, being part of Canada, but culturally, think Northeast. And this is another positive sign. Here we have the U.S. military. This is Zero Hedge, Tyler Durden, as always. Pentagon, quote, "exploring," close quote, "payback for troops kicked out over the COVID-19 vaccine mandate." So it says the U.S. Department of Defense may provide payback or back pay to former service members who were removed for not receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, coming after the Pentagon repealed the mandate, a spokesperson confirmed Friday. So this is all good news coming from south of the 49 here. It's not directly related to our military, so and we're running up on the 2-hour mark here. But if you guys want to check that out, that's Zero Hedge. And this is looking like we could see some really positive developments for service members in the United States. And as I said before, the United States is kind of a bellwether, I think, for the rest of the free world, especially right now, the free world being under CCP influence. But if if the military is starting to show signs of turning back on these heavy-handed mandates in the U.S., then I think that's going to that's a good bellwether for where we're going to be headed in 2023 here in Canada. So back to my original one, and I'm right on the 2-hour mark. That's not too bad for me. Holy smokes, guys. But anyway, I know I'm a pretty long-winded in these podcasts. I'm trying to cut them down a little bit just to pack them with some more information and get the content, nice and tight and get it out there. But there's so much going on, and every day I get out there and I look at these headlines and I kind of see, I guess, how it all kind of ties together. And I try to do that with this presentation is just to try to present all of this stuff sort of thematically, try to tie it together and explain, understand as best I am able, I guess what's really going on out there, and give it that that kind of veteran lens, the PSYOP lens and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, it always turns out to be a heck of a project, but thanks for sticking with me out there, guys. And I'll throw out a couple of contents before we sign off here, kind of saying great show. Thank you. We have the regulars in here. They're always well appreciated here, guys. Interesting live feed, Jeff. Darlene is saying, and another terrific job from Colleen. We got any trolls today? We had a troll the other day. It's been a while, really. It's been pretty clean coming in here. So, but I like to throw to my detractors once in a while here. And Darlene was born in Cape Breton. Okay, right on. Another Maritimer here. Patricia saying, haha, hardcore Maritimers. Yeah, and I enjoyed the PEI guy. I'm glad he's getting that out there. That's really what I think Albertans are missing out here is that we're rural people out here in the Maritimes too. We're not like, when they say the East, they tend to think of like the city folk, the city slickers, but that's not what Maritimers are really like. We're just kind of, the last few decades, especially, we've been more dependent on some of these government programs to support things like seasonal work and the tourism industry, and that's kind of what the government seems to want around these parts. Is they just want to have tourism and a nice, pretty landscape and stuff like that, and it's not sustainable because we're completely dependent on equalization payments from Alberta, and of course Halifax just soaks them up. The cities just soak them up. So it's not really working for anybody who lives here. It would be a tired cliche to say we're all in this together. But yeah, I think it is. There is a real kind of urban-rural divide, and let's go easy on the urban folks out there, eh, Alberta? Or not the urban folks. Don't go easy on them. We'll go easy on the rural folks. Us rural folks gotta go easy on each other. Till next time, folks. I'll see you tomorrow. But stay frosty and stay safe out there.